Greeting everyone, my name is Young Nam, and I will be presenting our recent study, Latent Class Analysis of Co-occurring substance use and suicide behavior among immigrants and non-immigrant adolescents in South Korea. Adolescence is often described as a period of intense emotional and social stress, a time when young people navigate identity, autonomy, and belonging. In South Korea, this developmental stage is particularly high stakes given the country's high competitive educational environment and growing concern around youth mental health. National survey continue to show that both substance use and suicidality remain major public health issue among adolescents. Traditionally, these two behaviors, substance use and suicidality, have been studied separately and as distinct outcomes. However, the emerging body of research suggests that these may co-occur within the same individuals, possibly reflecting shared underlying mechanisms such as emotional dysregulation, social isolation, or cumulative stress exposure. To capture these complex co-occurring patterns, researchers have begun using person-centered approaches, particularly latent class analysis. Unlike variable-centered models that examine single predictors, LCA allows us to identify subgroups of adolescents who share similar profiles of substance use and suicidal behaviors. Yet, despite the growing international use of this method, only a few studies in Korea have adopted such person-centered approaches. At the same time, South Korea's immigrant background youth population is rapidly expanding, now exceeding 207,000 as of 2024. These adolescents often face unique social and institutional challenges such as experience of marginalization, language barriers, and limited access to culturally responsive mental health support. However, empirical evidence about how substance use and suicidality manifest and potentially co-occur among immigrant versus non-immigrant adolescents in Korea remain extremely limited. Our study addresses this gap. This study was guided by two main research questions. First, what are the latent patterns of substance use and suicide-related behaviors among Korean adolescents? And second, do these co-occurring patterns differ between immigrants and non-immigrant youth? To interpret potential differences, we draw on three competing theoretical frameworks. The first is the negative assimilation framework rooted in a cultural relative stress theory. From this perspective, immigrant adolescents are at higher risk for behavior and emotional problems due to cultural marginalization, discrimination, and systemic exclusion. Under this framework, we would expect immigrant background adolescents to be overrepresented in higher risk classes, though characterized by substance use and suicidality. In contrast, the second framework, the immigrant paradox, proposed the opposite trend. Despite socioeconomic disadvantage, immigrant adolescents often show lower behavior risk compared to their native-born peers. This pattern is often attributed to protective cultural factors such as strong family cohesion, community networks, and collectivistic value systems that buffer against risk-taking behaviors. If this framework holds, we would expect immigrant adolescents to cluster in lower-risk latent classes. Finally, the third framework is behavior convergence model. This perspective emphasizes that over time, shared school environment, peer networks, and exposure to similar media culture lead immigrants and non-immigrants adolescents towards similar behavior patterns. In other words, both groups might display comparable class distribution despite differences in background, suggesting that Environmental assimilation drive behavior outcomes rather than culturative stress or cultural protection. Taken together, the three frameworks capture both possibilities of divergence and alignment. These perspectives offer three competing hypotheses about how immigrants and non-immigrant adolescents might differ in their co-occurring patterns of substance use and suicidality. 1. Negative assimilation. Immigrant adolescents show higher risk due to marginalization. Second, immigrant paradox. Immigrant adolescence shows lower risk due to protective family and cultural. 3. Behavior convergence. No significant group differences. Shared environments shape similar outcome. Our analysis is designed to test which of these hypotheses best fit in the Korean context. The study used data from 2023 Korea Youth Risk Behavior Survey, a nationally representative dataset. The analytic sample were 45,105 students, including 1,706 from immigrant backgrounds and 43,404 from non-immigrant backgrounds. Indicators included 4 substance use behavior, drug, alcohol, cigarette, and e-cigarette use, and 3 suicidally measure, suicidal ideation, plan, and attempt. Predictors include perceived health, happiness, academic performance, and stress, while covariates included gender, school grade level, socioeconomic status, and immigrant background. The analysis proceeded in 2 stages. 1. Latent class analysis to identify subgroups based on co-occurring risk, and second, multinomial logistic regression to examine predictor of class membership. All analyses were conducted by M+ and Theta and R. These are the descriptive statistics of each variable and result. Model fit instead supported the 3-class solution as both statically and conceptually interpretable. The LCA identified 3 distinct profiles of co-occurring behaviors. Class 1, low suicide subset group. This group has minimal involvement in any substance use or suicidal behaviors. Class 2, suicide risk with alcohol group. This class shows the elevated suicidal ideation, planning, and attempt, often accompanied by alcohol use. Class 3, high substance group. This class has higher alcohol, cigarette, and e-cigarette use but relatively low suicidality. These profiles were statistically distinct and conceptually coherent, demonstrating meaningful heterogeneity among Korean adolescents. Class distribution by immigrant status shows non-immigrants at 96.3% and immigrants at 3.7% in Class 1. In Class 2, non-immigrants accounted for 94.9% and immigrants for 5%, showing a slight increase in the immigrant proportion compared to Classes 1 and 3. Finally, in Class 3, non-immigrants made up 96.4% and immigrants 3.6%. Despite small variation across classes, the overall similarity supports the behavior convergence hypothesis, which states that shared environments rather than cultural background drive behavior outcomes. Comparison of perceived health, happiness, academic performance, and stress revealed group differences. Low suicide substance group reported the best well-being, followed by the substance risk group, while the suicide risk group reported the lowest happiness and high stress. Following table present the result of multinomial logistic regression. First, immigrants' background was not significant in class 1, 2, or 3. Perceived health was associated with belonging to the suicide risk and alcohol group as it decreased, while in the high substance group was associated with higher perceived health. Perceived happiness show a similar patterns. Decreasing happiness was a defining feature of those in the suicide-related risk class. The difference was particularly clear between the suicide alcohol group and substance group. Consistently, adolescents who reported higher stress level were much more likely to belong to the suicide alcohol risk group rather than other two groups, and more likely to high substance group than low suicide substance group. Higher academic performance was linked to a lower likelihood of belonging to the high substance group. Adolescents who viewed themselves as doing well in school were far less likely to engage in alcohol, cigarette, and e-cigarette use. Gender patterns were clear and contrasting. Girls were more likely to appear in the suicide alcohol group, whereas boys were more likely to belong to the substance use group. Finally, school level mattered for substance use. Middle school students were more likely than high school students to belong to the substance risk group, suggesting that early adolescence is critical window for prevention and early intervention. Taken together, this finding indicates that stress and happiness were the most powerful psychological predictors of race class membership, while academic performance, gender, and school grade shaped the form that risk took. Importantly, immigrants' background did not significantly influence class membership, supporting the idea that shared school, social environment, and the life well-being, not migrant status drive adolescents' behavior outcomes. Discussion. Overall, immigrant and non-immigrant adolescents displayed remarkably similar behavior configuration. This convergence likely reflects shared experience within school, peer network, and digital media environment. Accordingly, prevention strategies should not be divided by immigrant status, but should target early identification of psychological distress in students. Universal school-based mental health program emphasizing stress regulation, resilience, and social-emotional learning are most effective, provided by remain attentive to subtle challenges uniquely faced by immigrant youth, such as language barrier or discrimination. This study offered three main insights. First, substance use and suicidal behaviors co-occur among Korean adolescents. And two, patterns are largely consistent across immigrant and non-immigrant adolescents. Three, emotional well-being and stress, not immigration background, could be the key determinants. Therefore, we can conclude promoting adolescent mental well-being universally while remaining sensitive to immigrant-specific need is important. Thank you for listening.